All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Joe. We'll see if other Joe shows up today. So, there's a couple things I wanted to hit on today. A little bit more on the topic of bugging out, as not necessarily a primary philosophy, but there's still a lot of resistance to the idea of bugging out in the Western world. And that makes sense because we've lived in relative normalcy and there's not a ton of, hey, Joe, there you are. How's it going? Hello, ME. Nice to see you as well. In the Western world, we've been pretty spoiled by relative peace and normalcy. We haven't had to deal with too many extreme events that require long duration bug out outside of hurricanes, that type of thing, right? But there are a lot of events, and the ones we're seeing over in Europe, and that's part of the reason why I'm so focused on what's happening in Ukraine, because it's a real time case study in true SHTF, because you're looking at regional and local breakdown. For all intents and purposes, the local governments in these cities that are being attacked right now have more or less ceased to function at all past a certain point. We're not even seeing local fire departments functioning in a lot of these places anymore from the journalistic coverage that we are getting out and that is slowly trickling out of these cities. Thank you. Yeah, I just got a haircut today. Really needed to happen. Way overdue. So on that note, and we hit on the other day a little bit on the idea that maybe, just maybe, it would be a good idea to have some egress routes planned because you may not be able to stay where you're located. Even if you're in the Western world, there might be a situation where law enforcement shows up. Maybe there's a situation just on your street where they have to evacuate you because of a standoff situation. There might be a gas leak. Post-collapse fires are going to be one of the most devastating things that people are going to have to deal with, period. Just because there's so many ways that can happen. Somebody's pet knocking over a candle because there's no electricity. And I expect you're seeing a lot of fires in a lot of these smaller Ukrainian towns too, as they lose electricity under the same auspice, because people are not used to living without the grid, even in much of Ukraine. They're a relatively modern country. They're certainly not a first world nation by Western standards. But as many of these cities become uninhabitable, your opportunity or your ability, I should say, to stay in these areas becomes more and more limited by the day. If you don't have water, if you don't have basic emergency services, electricity, your grocery store has been looted, and now you have a military that is not friendly to your nation that is now coming into this region. How long do you wait, right? That's the big question. Do you wait to the point where your own military is now parked on your front lawn before you consider leaving? I would submit that that's too late. You have waited too long by that point. And we know this because we still see those many, many mile long evacuation routes outside of places like Mariupol in Ukraine. Those are the people who waited, unfortunately, too long. And at this point, and I'm beginning to see some reporting from there, that they're being ordered to leave. So it gets past that point. Maybe you've decided to stay. You're like, I'm just going to wait this out. But you can't. You're now being ordered by government agents of your new government, in this case, ordering you to leave. So you can't stay. So you have to be prepared for these type of eventualities, especially if you're in an area of the world like that. So having a bag ready to go. And it doesn't need to be an all-encompassing survival bag either. You don't need tons of outdoor gear if you're just going to get into your car. What you need is the ability to conduct basic hygiene. You need clothes. You need insurance documents. You need deeds and things that prove what you own and what you did own, what you're leaving behind. Photographs of things you're leaving behind, because you might be able to follow up on an insurance claim or something at some point in the future. Or there may be some payment or restitution if anything gets stolen or looted during that period from whomever takes that region over, should you choose to return. Or that way you can at least prove that you do live there should you decide to come back and deal with that new government. But you have to understand, when this happens, your civil liberties might be radically different under this new regime as well. Is that something that you're willing to accept or tolerate? Are you going to make contingency plans to stay, and do certain things? Or are you going to make contingency plans to, again, have those routes planned out of how you're going to leave? And you're going to be the crazy one that leaves before everyone else. You're going to be the one that calls your employer and uses your sick time and bounces. Because if you time it wrong, and that's going to be the concern that a lot of people have, then you're going to be financially ruined, right? Because you timed this wrong. Well, now that invasion or that event that you thought was going to happen tomorrow morning actually ended up happening a month later, and you went back home and now you're stuck there. So there's a real finesse to figuring out exactly how to play this off and how to plan for this. The tax docs and everything, Emmy, are huge. Even having all of this backed up on like a couple of thumb drives or something, and then putting it in like a Faraday case type thing, something that's sealed to the elements as well, would be huge. That way you're not carrying around. And if you can, have a big binder with the paper stuff, but have that digital backup should something happen to the paper along the way. That would be massively important. But as I said, at what point do you say, all right, we go? If you're within striking distance of a foreign military, I think it's probably time to go. Again, as I said, if your military is now staging on your lawn, or if this new government is now using your lawn or your property as a camp, you've waited too long. So we want to prepare for this, because we want to reduce not only our suffering, but potentially the suffering of our family. And if more people were switched on with this idea that preparedness is really a way of alleviating or preventing unnecessary suffering by doing something ahead of time, we would not see these major events unfold in the way we do. We would not need to see the amount of humanitarian aid and resources pour into an area if people left ahead of time. If they had the foresight to go, you know what, things are getting really weird. Honey, we're going to take both cars. We're going to load them up with everything we can take. We're going to put a couple months worth of food in there. And that stores in only several buckets. I mean, you've got your rice, beans, that type of stuff. Put that in the trunk and load up all those other essentials, the pets and whatever, and then go. Unfortunately, again, people are waiting too long, and now you're going to see things get to a point because there isn't fuel and there aren't resources pouring in these towns where people are going to have to leave on foot, and they're going to have to leave even more behind. Or again, because these lines are so long to exfil the area, cars are going to break down, they're going to run out of gas while they're sitting there, and there is no resupply. So now they're on foot. Now they can't move. Because they were either sedentary or they think they're going to bring all this extra stuff with them, and that's just not going to happen. It's also the reason, again, why I've mentioned this idea of possibly having caches along that route, or in certain European countries, you can likely, in neighboring areas, rent a storage unit and make those preps now. Yes, take photos, keep them on an SD card. Absolutely. Especially those the ones you can't replace, right? Ones of relatives who are no longer with us. That would be such a major loss for a lot of people. If you had to depend on your memory as you aged what someone looked like, and you lost all these photographs that you could, again, spend minutes making that preparation now. And, in the case too, if you live in an unstable area, maybe have a safe deposit box in the next nation over with, again, another level of redundancy with those documents, because you may find yourself in a position where as you travel, maybe you get to the border checkpoint and they say, all right, everybody get out of your car, and you can't take anything that's in your car with you now. So now you're in even a worse spot than you even realize, right? And that's just something to keep in mind. But again, getting to that point where you can kind of master that basic skill, and it's a skill that carried us throughout human history, because you may have to bail out of your vehicle 10, 15 miles away from that border check. You need to be able to walk. You need to have a decent pack, and you need to be able to deal with that. And I've mentioned things like e-bikes and stuff recently. And one of the things that I poked into as an alternative that I thought was kind of interesting was the Honda Navi, which is essentially a motorcycle, but it's basically a glorified scooter. It's automatic. It gets about officially 100 miles per tank, but about 70 or 80 if you're hammering down on it. And they sell for $1,800, which is way less than most e-bikes that can put out similar performance, which I thought was kind of an interesting option, especially if you're, more urban oriented or something that could get you out and get you around a bunch of stopped four-wheeled vehicles. So that could be a good opportunity, something to look into if you are exploring alternative modes of transportation. And it's also small enough where you could easily put this on some type of trailer hitch mount. So if you end up in a traffic jam or your primary vehicle breaks down, you can pull this off, get on it, throw your spouse or your kid on the back of this, and keep going. There is room for one extra person. So definitely continue to explore alternative options. Even bicycles are a valuable tool. Don't underestimate bicycles. Even if you're not in the best physical condition, you can cover a lot of ground as long as it's relatively flat in an incredible amount of time. You'd be surprised, especially if you have a couple of gears. I would definitely recommend getting more than 7 would be ideal. The 7-gear ratio I've found is a little more taxing than it needs to be, especially if you're just starting out with that. The other thing too with your vehicle readiness, again, like good likelihood you do have access to a vehicle, right? Get ahead of any of the maintenance or possible parts shortages we are seeing right now. For example, I know that my rotors on my truck are a little rusty. I actually had to have one of them kind of bent back a little bit because it was rubbing. And that's where they picked up on the rust issue, which I kind of want to maybe be proactive. I'm thinking about that. Do I replace the rotors now? Because I know that on the manufacturing side, there are major shortages of rotors right now. So are there parts in your car that are imported that maybe you should deal with right now, right? Side by sides are where it's at. Yep. That would be a great option. The issue, though, if you're attempting to take it on the road, obviously, if there's a major event, it's not going to be a big problem. But the legality of operating it in many areas is going to be a problem. Where the motorcycles you can tag and title, though you'll need the endorsement on your license, where you wouldn't need that with the e-bike. The other reason the Navi looked kind of interesting is because it's a carbureted engine, so it's pretty basic. So it should be pretty resilient to EMPs or that type of event. I didn't see anything about computer systems or anything on it because it is about as basic as you can get. The Yamaha TTR 125 ME, yeah, that would be an awesome option, and I'm sure you could. You can put on a cycle rack. What type of? And the thing I was wondering as far as adding like additional racks or things, because you can do that on an e-bike too. Some of these e-bike designs more easily than others in terms of transporting cargo. So you don't have to just have a really big heavy pack, but you could even disperse some of the weight on your bike. And I haven't really seen too many setups for dirt bikes, but I'm not super well versed in the motorcycle arena or world by any means. But they could certainly be a very useful tool post collapse or in a major event. Again, just for that ability to weave in and out of traffic and then take the roads less traveled, literally, improved hiking trails, that type of thing that most people just simply won't be able to access with their conventional vehicles. And just even knowing the old highway systems in your area is huge because so many people are overly dependent on this, right? They need their navigational system to get them everywhere. So if you know the old highways that existed before the interstate, you are likely to be much further ahead than the average bear when it comes to this type of thing. That is hugely important. That's where maps come in handy. Obviously, these don't provide real-time information if there's road work, but knowing how to navigate by those old highway systems is huge. I was able to do this even in Colorado, where people will sit on those the new mountain highways on I-70, I want to say, but running parallel to it, literally parallel through all these old little mountain towns, is the highway system people used to use to get through that area, and everyone just ignored it. They'd rather just sit in gridlock, which is shocking to me. So moving along, we hit on the consider caching and the storage routes and that type of thing, safe deposit boxes in alternate locations, that type of level of preparedness. Again, it's not exceedingly expensive to do that, especially if you were to divide the costs with other family members or another family, especially with the idea of a storage unit that's strategically positioned. Definitely something that might be worth looking into for sure, depending upon what your current setup is. Now, moving on to money. which is, of course, the title of this particular stream. Now, with the way the algorithms work now, it becomes very hard to go back in the Wayback Machine. So getting the exact number has been made exceedingly more difficult, because the figure that I remember was during the year 2020, we printed 40% of all existing currency. And that number has only escalated. Now I'm seeing figures that might suggest as much as 80% of US dollars that exist today were created over the last 2 years. Now, what's that going to do on a long enough timetable? Well, we can already see the effects. Everything is now more expensive. And it was funny, I saw an article suggesting that, like, oh, well, they didn't actually technically print all of those dollars, so that's okay. No, they just flooded it into all the markets to prevent things from falling apart, it was just very humorous how they tried to spin it as a net positive. Oh, there's nothing wrong with increasing the amount of money that's available. Nothing bad has ever happened to any country or civilization that's done that in the past. And then, of course, cited no historic examples. Of course, we know that that's absolutely nonsense. But as of right now, the effects on all of us is just, it's frightening, right? As we attempt to earn a living wage, as we work in a variety of different fields. I'm sure we all work in a diverse areas. Those of us in this chat here and everything, this discussion that we're having. And it's not like your boss is going to give you a serious raise this year. Probably none. If you're, maybe if you're lucky, maybe $1,000, right? Which is something to kind of scoff at, given the reality of just how much more expensive everything is. With gas doubling over the last couple of years, practically, with many products up 50 or 100%. That's why I also mentioned the simple fact you need to get proactive on that vehicle maintenance too, as your primary method of transportation, even just to get you to your job. Because if we end up seeing an escalation in the conflict, these imported parts, they just won't be making it to our shore. Yeah, well, yeah. If you run your own carpentry business, a constitutional carpenter, yeah, that would be easy, right? You just charge people a little more, and you're going to have to cover your own expenses, right? That just makes perfect sense. I was actually pricing out some lumber the other day, and the pricing is just still horrendous, because a lot of this was being ordered at the older price points. So if you're working on any big projects right now, yeah, wow, there's a reason why home prices are through the roof still. There's a reason why there's an incentive for builders to charge more as well, because of all the costs that they're having to incur. So when you're seeing median home prices, well, they'll tell you they're building a new community, and you'll see the signage and it says, from the low 400s. And you're just looking at that and you're like, okay, but what's it really? Well, it's really like a $550,000 house if you want anything above builder grade materials, right? And there's definitely plenty of carpentry work around right now. So, if you have more than just the apprentice level stuff, right? If you're like the journeyman or the master level, then you're certainly in a position to make a lot of money right now. I think in terms of carrying equipment, Stabbin, Joe, that yes, a side-by-side probably would be a good choice, because you could easily carry a gas can in that too, or even a trailer behind that with additional supplies or things for sure. But like I said, my concern will really be if you were to attempt to navigate on roadways, depending on how far along you are on that event. And if you're part of that switched on population that's getting out of town ahead of time, the side-by-side doesn't really make much sense, because you still have quite a bit of law and order, and that's going to attract a lot of undue attention, would be my thought process on that. But if you're using some of those unimproved trails, or the improved trail systems, or hiking paths, or wherever you could take that side-by-side, it would, I think, make sense for that, but less for road use is my thought on that. The other thing too I wanted to hit on, crypto obviously is a big topic here on YouTube, and it does make sense as part of an investment strategy. But with the direction that many governments are going, it's very likely we're going to see a lot of regulation as they implement their own government cryptocurrencies. And got me thinking a lot more about physical assets too, silver and gold, and to that bugging out philosophy as well. Well, you can't exactly, sure, you can take a hard drive with you if you have a crypto wallet, but a lot of people maybe use third parties like Coinbase or other things to host their crypto wallet. And you could easily be locked out of that. We've seen that in other countries. So being unable to access your money is certainly something to be concerned about. So having those tangible assets, and maybe not even in coinage, but in terms of like jewelry, because we've seen situations where countries have bailed in their gold and silver coinage before. The United States has done that. So having it in other means might be the best idea. But you have to understand that it won't hold its value during a collapse event, not to the level that you think it might, because there'll be a lot of other people who are looking to part with their jewelry or things along the way. And as I mentioned, when you enter that refugee status, should you find yourself in that situation, you have that silver and gold with you in your vehicle, and you're likely going to be parting with all of it to move across the border, right? That's going to be your price of admission. Now, are you going to be saddened about giving away grandma's ring? Sure. But I think she would be pretty okay knowing that that helped you get to safety. So you might have to deal with that part of it. Yeah, there's an emotional element to it, but it may come in handy for that purpose. Yeah, grid down would be a disaster for the crypto market. I mean, you're not exactly going to be able to easily exchange it. Unless you just hand over your hard drive to somebody else. But what are they going to do with that hard drive, right? Ammo is certainly a good option. 100% agree with that. And with the pricing that's going on right now, and Vista Outdoors put out that they will be increasing the prices across the board. They've invested a lot of capital into their operation recently. So we can expect that that's part of the reason as to why. But the raw material costs are going up. The shipping costs are going up. So getting everything to that factory, I'm sure that hopefully they have raised wages to keep, the good employees there making a good quality product. So that's all going to go back into why this is getting more and more expensive. I went to Academy Sports today just to kind of check things out, see what the Freedom Seed situation is, and it was not great. It was pretty picked over. 9 mil. The more affordable options, $18.99 a box. That was for steel case. Everything else was at least a couple dollars more expensive at $25 a box. 40 cal though was sitting around $22 or $24 a box and change, which was surprising that it was really only a couple of dollars more than it was a few years ago. I haven't bought 40 in quite some time, but that's, as I pointed out previously, a really viable option. If you buy a 40 caliber pistol, most of the popular flavors in that caliber, you can easily convert them to 9 mil. So you have that option. The gas tank. Billy happened to my cousin's neighbor. Was this people stealing gas? Is that what was happening, Joe? Because I've been seeing more and more news reports about that across the country. That's becoming a bigger issue. Yeah, that's certainly becoming a bigger issue. And then we're seeing more reports too of vans or other modified vehicles rolling into gas stations and parking over top of where they would fill up the tanks, and then having the bottom is cut out, and then they're siphoning hundreds of gallons out of those tanks and driving away. So of course the cost of that is all going to get shifted onto us as well. So yeah, exactly. Yeah. Your ability to interchange parts with all of that is going to be really useful. And the other thing too, as everything that's going on right now continues in Europe, we're going to see a lot more demand for those duty and law enforcement pistols. You're going to see a lot more contracts go out. There's going to be a lot more demand for components. And guess what? The commercial market and the consumer market will always will always lose out in terms of importance to these companies. And of course, countries can easily nationalize their industry and say, you know what? No civilian production right now. We simply can't do that right now because at the end of the day, we have too many military officers, too many police officers, too many whatever that need new arms, or we need these parts. Yeah, that gas thing, like I said, is nuts. And that's the other thing too. If you do have the ability to store fuel, at least a couple cans, throw some stable in there. Do try and cycle it out every several months if you can, just to be on the safe side so you don't damage anything. But I've had some fuel that has had stable on it, and some of the gas that's in my generator right now is probably 8 or 9 years old. I haven't really run the whole tank through, but I've added stable, add fresh gas periodically, fire it up every so often. Really should drain it, but a lot of fuel will run much longer than you realize. Again, could damage your engine. That's a risk for sure. But so a lot of people always found it funny, and I did too, past a certain point for like Walking Dead, where these vehicles kept running and running and running. But if fuel was actually stored correctly, it actually can hold for much longer than people realize. They removed the entire gas tank, Joe. Wow. I know the catalytic converter thing had been a problem. Even where I had just been living, we had a number of catalytic converter thefts overnight, where they're just jacking people's cars up, and then with a little saw, just a couple quick cuts and they're gone. They seem to be targeting specific models of car around the country. There's really no good fix for those. I've seen a couple like snake oil style products that some companies have been implementing to claim to mitigate it, but a lot of them have some major weak points. Like you could just cut right through the brackets and then just go right to work, and it might only delay you by an extra 30 seconds. So yeah, the catalytic converter theft is a big problem. I think you'll probably start seeing other car parts taken too. On a long enough timetable, tires will probably become a really big hot commodity because we don't really produce them here. They're mostly imported. And that goes right back to we've been speaking about the possibility of rationing, right? If government was to intervene and we were to see rationing, and as I said, I don't know that we would even need government to get involved, simply because the private sector just won't even be able to deliver a lot of this stuff. So they'll impose it themselves. Like Academy had limits of 4 boxes today, for example. So there's still purchasing limits, and they've been re-implemented on certain things again. And we're just going to see more and more of that as that becomes just commonplace across the board. I've seen limits over the past year on everything from milk to cartons of eggs. I'm sure you have too. This is, and I hate to use this, when you look at the monetary system too that we have, but this is just all the hallmarks of a late stage empire. As the middle class begins to fall by the wayside and we shift into this have and have not situation. One of the things that I observed in my immediate area, and I've lived in this area before, but it was never like this, where it was this have versus have nots, where you have blue collar folks like myself, and then I'm seeing far more luxury cars. Like it used to just be nice BMWs, maybe newer Porsches. Now it's Ferraris, McLarens, and new Bentleys. Like I never saw this level of excess before. And good for them. I mean, I'm not saying they didn't work hard or make some really good life choices that put them in that spot, but I don't know that now is the best time to be that flashy. I don't know how disconnected they are from everyone else in that world, but in their own little sphere, because they certainly probably are. But there's definitely a lot more money that's being concentrated at the higher level for sure, especially with real estate values ballooning and things like that. As millennials fall further and further behind, our home ownership rates are really low comparative to other generations at the same age range. And on a long enough timetable too, and that's kind of you need to pick like a decent job or a decent field, even something with remote work at this point, and you just need to. I'm not saying stick with the same company forever, but get experience in one field. Find an area of the country that's reasonably affordable, where that has really low taxes, if any at all, on your property past a certain age range, because there are states that once you become a senior citizen, you don't pay tax. If you can get a job, pay down a house in 25, 30 years, you're kind of set, because in terms of like your retirement income is going to be really limited. I don't expect Social Security will be around for my generation. I don't think we can bet that will be here. But I think really the best way to insulate yourself is to just get into some property and then pay it off as quickly as possible. Yeah, Billy, I think you're right. I don't think they're just stealing those gas tanks for the fuel off the vehicles. More than likely, they're probably selling it uh, on a through some less than savory means and selling that entire gas tank, especially in certain parts of the country. You mentioned Idaho or other places, right, where you're maybe more likely to be exposed to salt or other corrosive elements that might rot some tanks out. Yeah, 2 for 1 even. Right, yeah, I mean, again, you're gonna see more and more car parts taken, um, if it's easy to get to. So having, like, security lug nuts on your vehicle, maybe that's worth doing, as tires become a big like I said, I think that's gonna be a big problem in the immediate future because it really does not take that long to remove tires from somebody's vehicle, with if they don't have any security features. And I mean, you see that in the inner city all the time anyway, but I think you'll see that branch out into the suburbs as a lot of things also just don't get reported or tracked in the same type of way you would expect. Because if something is considered an ongoing investigation, it never hits the crime blotter, and they can just leave something as ongoing investigation for a long time. So you never even realize that that thing is going on in your neck of the woods. Oh, one of the other things too that I wanted to hit on, over the counter pharmaceuticals. So I had a relative called the other night, an older relative, and they needed something that they didn't have access to. They no longer drive. So I went out, and the exact item they were asking for was not available. In fact, a lot of things were not available on the shelves at the local pharmacy. I ended up running to the local supermarket. Same thing. Their little pharmacy area was pretty picked over as well. So I would encourage you, because most of the stuff is pretty affordable, to look at what gaps there are in your own home pharmacy kit and fill them, because the stuff's only going to get more expensive and harder to get if you can even obtain certain things locally. I was pretty shocked actually, but this goes back to even having some basic knowledge and some skills, right? So the issue that they were dealing with, I was like, okay, well, there are some alternatives that are here and are available over the counter. So I call them and I'm like, hey, this is what's here. This is actually a good option for what is troubling you. What if we get this? So after a little bit of convincing, they're like, okay, all right, that'll be fine. And sure enough, worked like a charm. But you do need to keep that in mind, that you need to know what products to look at, what products can have multiple uses, what the shelf life is on a lot of this stuff, how to store certain things. A lot of things can last well beyond their expiry date and still be relatively potent. Heck, even aspirin that's been stored correctly 100 years from now. You can find antique bottles of aspirin. Has it lost some of its potency? Sure. But if it was stored in a dry place, it will still provide some relief. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, we have NASCAR pit crew people that are gonna start stealing tires, right? Yeah. I mean, you'll see it. Like I said, I expect you're gonna start seeing that escalation. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that was the big thing I noticed when all the craziness started too. And a couple weeks before everything popped off, I was one of the crazies who was out there who I was monitoring this, right? I was looking at what was happening overseas, how that government was reacting, and I was like, okay, this could be the one that everyone's predicting it is, or it has been predicting for years that it would be. And of course, we whatever, right? Once we figured it all out. But I went in there and I didn't hoard, right? Because that's going to be a label that's going to be thrown around a lot, and they're going to double down on that. Hello, cat. Crash the stream. They're going to double down on that a lot. But I went out and I bought a couple of bottles of cold medicine. Everything was very deep at this point still. No one had gone out. So bought that, bought some Pepto Bismol, bought things for all of the uh, what they described as symptoms might be, right? And put that stuff back. And sure enough, I remember having a coworker whose kid who became very ill, and they didn't have anything. She's like, I can't find any cough medicine anywhere. It's like, why would you not have that stuff on hand? I don't know. It surprised me, a lot of stuff that we take for granted that we really do need to have at all times in our little home pharmacy kits, because for like 30 or 50 bucks, you can put back pretty much every type of over-the-counter thing you might need over the next year even. So it's not like you have to go out and break the bank on this, but this type of stuff, again, that availability is going to keep waning because most of it's imported. Almost all the components used to make most of the stuff, even your vitamins, don't come from this country. And they're coming from countries that are becoming increasingly less friendly towards us for good reason, because we continue to escalate things in Europe. So as they pull further and further away from us, we're going to have less access to the things that they produce as they insulate themselves more and more and get ready for the new economic reshuffling that's occurring. But yeah, so that's just some thoughts before I dip out. Make sure to definitely go through the over-the-counter stuff that you have. And then if there's certain prescription things that you might need, hit your doctor up. Tell them you're concerned a little bit about some of the supply situation. There's a list on the FDA's website of the different products that are running low right now that require script. And your doctor's more than likely going to write you, instead of the 1 month supply, maybe a 3 month supply of your medication. Even if you just tell them you're maybe going to do some traveling, if you don't want to mention the shortage, there's ways or workarounds for your verbiage on that. But it's definitely worth having more and more of that on hand, because there were even shortages, I know, of inhalers. Those are imported. All kinds of stuff over the last couple of years. Mamet and Nemiko took his cat to safety in Poland and then went home to... No. Isn't that like Ukraine's most... Oh, maybe. Isn't that like Ukraine's most famous cat or something? I did see something on Ukraine's most famous cat that had made its way out with its owners. But no, I'm not 100% sure if that's what you're referring to. But that's about it for me for today. I would just, like I said, encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. Understand and accept the direction that we're heading. Continue to build those local networks, build those local relationships the best you can to insulate yourself from all of this the best you can. Because as we continue to transition into whatever it is that they have planned for us, it's going to be more and more uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm not familiar with the cat. I'll do some Google foo on that, Emmy. Have a great day. Have a great day, everybody. Unless you have anything else you want to chat about, I'm going to dip out. Thanks for listening to my rambles. Poland had a famous bear. Actually, if you want to look up a funny story about a bear real quick, historic story. There was a bear that some Polish troops ended up adopting during World War II, like really early on. And they brought it out into the field with them and raised it from a bear cub, and it would drink beer with them and it would carry ammunition for them. It ended up living out the rest of its life at a British zoo. But it's pretty funny, and there's some pictures of the bear in the field with all the men, just being a soldier, basically. Strange animals for sure. You guys have a great day. Oh, out of curiosity, anyone know that 3 people from Ukrainian government? Yeah, I mean, you know what? That wouldn't surprise me. Goes to Christmas. The level of corruption in that part of the world is absolutely terrible. And I pointed out too, and you wonder, all the money that we just sent over there, right? What are they going to buy with it? You've already pretty much tapped out a lot of the global stockpiles. Most NATO countries just sent weapons. Canada says they're pretty much tapped out. So anything that they're going to buy is at least months and months away from even being manufactured. So if they can't buy from surplus or existing stockpiles, where's all that going to go? So anyway, guys, take care.